Hello and welcome to this evening session, which we call the IPSC Solidarity Sessions. My name is Tom Lonergan. I'm the Education Officer for IPSC, and I'm just going to be introducing this session. Tonight's session is called, let's see, I need to share my slides here. Okay, so tonight's session is Solidarity as Praxis, Psychology, Power, and the Struggle for Palestine by Dr. Rebecca Heslin. So Dr. Rebecca Heslin is on the line, and we also have Matthew Thornton on the line, who is just assisting with the webinar. So this is part 4 of a 5-part series. So we've had, as you can see there on the screen, we've had 3 sessions already. One on the central bank, one from Imad Mohammed, a Palestinian photojournalist, and one on international law and Palestine by Dr. John Reynolds. We're having one final one on next Monday night, and which is more focused on activism in Ireland, the priorities, the campaigns, etc. I'll speak a little bit more about that at the end, and that's presented by Zoe Lawler, our chair, IPSC chair, and Brian O'Hagerty, our media officer. So tonight's session is being conducted on Zoom. It's a Zoom webinar. Rebecca is going to speak for about 30 or 40 minutes. After that, we're going to have a Q&A. You can see 3 buttons on the bottom of your screen. One of them says chat, one of them says raise hand, and one of them says Q&A. The only one that will be active for this evening's session really will be Q&A. And so you can type your questions in there, and we will get around to as many of those questions as we can later on. So we will answer those questions either verbally, and Rebecca will be answering most of those questions, I expect, either verbally or by text. And if you have any further questions just on the solidarity sessions or whatever, you can email education@ipsc.ie. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to hand over to Rebecca. So thank you, Rebecca, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation.
Hey, everybody, and thanks for coming this evening. So for those of you who might know me, my name is Rebecca. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm the vice chair of the Dublin branch of IPSC. And I suppose when we were thinking together about putting the solidarity sessions in place, I suppose I'm always thinking about how do we use the skills that we have within the movement to support each other and to think about building within what we have as well. So my lecture is entitled Psychology, Power, and the Struggle for Palestine. I'm somebody who, I suppose, approaches psychology through a feminist lens, and I'm always curious about power structures and how they operate and how we can, I suppose, attend to them. So to make sure that we're kind of cognizant always of how power is intersecting with the work that we're doing and how we can capitalize on it, right? So, that should go to the next slide, and it's not. Bear with me. And next. Aha. So yes, I was just going to set, I suppose, a scene for this. So before we start, for anybody that's here, I'm conscious there might be lots of different mental health professionals, people with no experience whatsoever in psychology, people who are better read than I am, have lots of different ideas and opinions on things. And I was going to say, just like take what's helpful and leave the rest, and that's okay. So there's more than one way of thinking about things, and that's going to be, I suppose, a theme through what I'm talking about this evening. And actually, it's really important relationally to be able to disagree. So if there's stuff you don't like, stuff you're not interested in, stuff that doesn't apply to you, that's absolutely fine, and it's to be expected. And I suppose also just to acknowledge at the offset that every single thought I have about everything is informed by people I've read, people I've met, people I've worked with and organised with. So I can't really take credit for some of the ideas in here. It's really kind of, I suppose, extending the experiences that we've had through other social movements, either myself or other actionists, people, activists, people that I've worked with, and thinking about how do we apply it? How can we learn from the experiences of others? And I suppose this was where I kind of wanted to start this evening, was for us to take a minute or two to ourselves to think about, as activists, as people who are involved in the struggle for Palestine, why do we do what we do? And I think that's a question that people are confronted with every day. Why are we doing what we're doing? And how do we keep doing it? And on the surface, I suppose this is really straightforward. Like, you ask most people about getting involved with Palestine, whether that was 20, 30, 40 years ago or in the last 2 years, most people will talk about the concept of like a moral injury, that this is something that is just so outside the scope of what should be allowed. It's people will say that this shouldn't be happening and I can't bear to watch it and I need to do something. So a lot of the time people are drawn to the struggle because it's a confrontation with a moral injury, that it's the idea that this is just so counter to everything that we know to be right that we have to do something. And the question of how do we keep doing it, I hope, is something that we'll be able to attend to a little bit this evening. So I suppose that's kind of the intention that I have for this evening, is to kind of resource us to think a little bit about how we mind each other in the movements and what function I suppose psychology can play in that. So yeah, as I said, like I'm going to set the scene a little bit on what to expect. So this is about solidarity in the context of the Palestinian struggle, but as I said, a lot of what I'll be talking about as well is it's applicable to other struggles. So when I'm talking about particular fractures or things that happen in movements, I'm not talking necessarily about like the context here. It's also just to look at pitfalls of where people get stuck or where fractures or things happen. And my intention is for it to be like a reflective session. I don't profess to be an expert in anything, but I have some expertise in some areas. But it's the idea that, as I said at kind of the start, that nobody has the answers to all of this, and that expectation actually, it doesn't help anybody to think that there's an expert way of engaging with the material. There's different ways of thinking about things, and thinking about things critically and through different lenses and getting different perspectives is really important. So this is just one way of thinking about it. So I'm hoping to offer some frameworks for making sense of what many of us have been. I've edited out the word feeling by accident there. That was the end of that sentence. And then looking at resourcing ourselves and others to keep going, because this is a longitudinal struggle, right? So I think it's always helpful when you're talking about content to share particular topics to define them. So I'm defining solidarity as a unification of people in support of a particular cause or group. So it's usually in response to injustice or oppression, and with a shared vision or a goal of effecting meaningful change. And it's a commitment to kind of to acting alongside others to support the cause. So it's solidarity is specific. It's kind of action oriented. Like solidarity isn't a feeling. It's something that it's a commitment to doing something, to working on something. It's not just a shared feeling, and it's different to charity. It's solidarity is being in the struggle. It's issue specific most of the time, although you'll find you'll see a lot of the same people showing up to challenge injustices in different shapes and forms, particularly in an Irish context. We run into each other around housing, around kind of organising anti-racist work, that, people have similar principles and they show up around similar kind of topics. It's inclusive of diverse experiences. So what that means is that, like, a lot of the time people don't need to be directly affected or have a personal tie to the issue in order to kind of feel driven towards working towards the common goal. And it's a process of standing with, so putting our shoulders to the wheel and working together and alongside each other. That solidarity is being in the struggle with. And I suppose in relating this to psychology, I think it's really helpful to think about solidarity primarily as a relational practice. So what I mean by a relational practice is it's done alongside the other and in relationship and through relationship to other. Because, when we're standing in solidarity, that doesn't mean that we're kind of standing alone. We're de facto standing with others. So it's something that happens relationally. And, praxis was the word I used to describe what we're talking about, but like to describe kind of praxis through a sociological kind of perspective, praxis is the dialectical relationship between theory and practice. So it's like a dynamic interplay of oftentimes opposing ideas, and the idea is that it's standing in that dialectic to understand and to get a better understanding of things through experiencing opposing ideas. So through this relationship, action is informed by reflection, and theory is shaped and honed through the application of practical experience. So what that means is it's shaped through kind of lived, like when you're out there and you're doing something and then you're thinking about it afterwards and critically analysing what happened, that also is a bidirectional piece where it informs the theory and then informs kind of moving forward. So it's a continuous cycle of doing things, thinking about the results, and then applying it towards a goal. So my intention today, I suppose, is to kind of think about solidarity, what has been learned across the movements, what we've noticed, what are the pitfalls, and then how do we resource people. So that's a little bit about what we're talking about. And when I'm talking about power this evening as well, I suppose a lot of what we've been feeling as a collective, and I can't speak for the collective, but a theme that comes up when you talk to people about what it's like to, I suppose, yeah, be kind of, and again, like I'm speaking kind of to activists about activism most of the time. So we're thinking about like the impact on, I suppose, how people feel about this. It's a lot of the time they're talking about the helplessness of coming up against structural power, that it's really difficult, that we did all of this and still there's no change. We put 60,000 people, 100,000 people on the streets and the government still haven't enacted the OTB, that there's this piece about this structural power and how powerless that can make us feel when it's so embedded and we're so, I suppose, like we're so encompassed by it. It's built into the air that we breathe. That can feel really overwhelming and really frustrating and really, really difficult, that we could have this many people up in arms and really, really angry about what's happening and our government still aren't listening or doing anything that's going to really kind of materially help the Palestinian people. So structural power, when I'm talking about, is talking about like institutions, laws, things like colonial histories, like all of this is to do with structural power. I'm going to talk a little bit as well about interpersonal power. And I think that when we're talking about organising, we're talking about solidarity, we are talking about group dynamics, as well as interpersonal power, which is like our personal power. So to think about, I suppose, the group piece, like what we're talking about is like group dynamics, privilege, like social roles, all of that is kind of like how power is concentrated within groups. And thinking about then interpersonal power, what you're thinking about is things like internalized depression or self-shaming or how we judge ourselves. So how we use power to either help or disenfranchise ourselves. And a lot of the time, and I suppose for anybody who doesn't have a background in psychoanalysis or psychology, we'd be talking about unconscious processes. So stuff that we're not doing consciously or by choice. It's that a lot of, when you kind of look at things, a lot of what we do is unconscious thought processes and it's shaped by our experiences of the world, how we've been cared for, how our communities have responded to us. And our brain kind of automatically, I suppose, it goes to thinking and behaving and interacting and feeling in specific ways based on that experience. So that's a complicated way of saying that a lot of how we think and feel is unconscious and that we're not consciously doing things, a lot of the time. So having that space for reflection and trying to make sense of why certain things are happening in groups or at a personal level can be really, really helpful in terms of, in terms of kind of minding ourselves and other. So yeah, that was kind of the question I was asking, was like, how can psychology help us understand the emotional, relational and political work of solidarity? So I suppose the theory is that, kind of understanding interpersonal power, understanding the power that we hold within ourselves, and intrapersonal power, the power that we hold as groups, and making conscious choices in relation to both can support the challenging of structural power. So this is about how we get organized and how we don't let, I suppose, unconscious process get in the way of us organizing at an individual or a group level. So this involves kind of understanding and responding to the injuries that we incur relationally. So that might sound a bit highfalutin, but all I mean is that, so what happens sometimes is like when we are in, say, a group and somebody might say something unintentionally that really wounds us, and we sometimes respond automatically without kind of a full picture and understanding of where that might have come from for the other person, or it activates something in us or it reminds us of how we were treated previously, and we might have a very kind of like, we might experience that really intensely. So that's what I mean by an injury, where like when we get wounded by others, like whether that's, and sometimes it is intentional, that does happen too, but like a lot of the times we kind of brush up against each other, and sometimes that really hurts actually when somebody says something that's too close to the bone or reminds you of something that's happened previously, and that can cause all sorts of eruptions in groups and things. So I suppose the other piece is understanding how ruptures can occur. So what are the common kind of things that show up relationally in groups, and then how do we kind of repair them? How do we think about minding ourselves and others in that? And when I'm talking about this specifically, I've said that like we don't have to make space for people to be mean to us. That's not what I mean at all. I'm really talking about like understanding our reactions to things and making choices about how we respond to them. And obviously if something is intentional and intentionally harmful, responding with boundaries and in a way that kind of protects us and protects the group. But yeah, I suppose I'm more talking about misunderstandings and kind of understanding where things can go off track, because we've hit off each other's sore points. So solidarity, I suppose the interpersonal impact, it requires work. So solidarity does require work. But, I kind of frequently say this to people, that solidarity doesn't feel bad. It's not something that feels bad. Actually, being part of a movement, a lot of the time, it feels comforting to not be alone in the struggle, to not be trying to change the world by yourself. But what it does do is it tends to confront us with a lot of different types of psychological discomfort. So I suppose one of the things I kind of mentioned earlier, like the idea of like being confronted with fragility, that, our own fragility, the parts that make us feel weak. So when we're meeting a kind of a big, giant global power that we feel, I can't actually change this in of myself, it can leave us feeling kind of guilt, it can lead us to feel shame, and it can lead us to feel quite defensive. So, I suppose the delineation between shame and guilt, if we're to think about them as universal, very uncomfortable human experiences. Guilt is usually around an action. So I might feel guilty because I didn't go to a protest. I might feel shame if I was thinking of myself as somebody who never bothers to do anything for the cause. So guilt is generally about an action or a lack of action, and shame is about your sense of self. And shame and guilt are some of the most unpleasant and uncomfortable human emotions. So humans will do all sorts of really interesting things and creative and clever things unconsciously to defend against those feelings, because none of us want to feel shameful. So we tend to get defensive. We tend to kind of find ways of pushing it out of ourselves so that we don't have to tolerate that really uncomfortable feeling that, I can't, that I haven't been able to do this, so I'm bad. So people get defensive and they do all sorts of things to try and psychologically protect against that shame feeling. So, I suppose another kind of piece around it is projection. That sometimes, when we feel like, we sometimes in circles talk about kind of the idea of the good activist, or, and it's kind of this fantasy that there's somebody who can, get it right all the time. So, that people make mistakes, and that's part of being human, and it's also how we learn. So sometimes what we'll do unconsciously is we'll project the bits of ourselves that we don't like. So, I might say, well, Matthew's always late for protests because that's something I might have been ashamed of. We kind of sometimes take that sense of badness that's in ourselves and put it onto other people so that it's outside of us. And then it doesn't feel as uncomfortable when we're putting it onto somebody else. Moral injury, we mentioned that at the start, like there's this piece, like, and so many people as well who are really new to the movement will talk about like the moment when they kind of realize that the world is just deeply unfair. And like for people who haven't maybe lived the brunt end of that or had experience of it at a personal level or witnessed people close to them go through it's a real kind of ripping of what would be kind of an unspoken social contract, that you work hard, you do the right thing, you go to college and life works out for you or whatever, you know what I mean? Whatever the person might have felt about that, there's a moral injury to it, that shouldn't be the case, that somebody could do everything right and still experience like the level of trauma and awful things that happen to people. And I suppose disconnection as well is another kind of component of this, where, when people have significant feelings of overwhelm, like one of the things that they do is pull back or they freeze or they withdraw. And I suppose when we're thinking about what I'm naming all of this is to humanize it. It's because this is stuff that we all feel that comes up and we mightn't be conscious of it as it's happening, but these are things that happen across activism. And it's to say that discomfort isn't harm. I think it's really important to kind of understand that discomfort, when we feel uncomfortable, it's information. It gives us information about something. And something that a lot of people that I work with don't know, like when I'm like a psychologist by trade, but a lot of the time people don't know that our emotions have jobs, like our emotions have a role and a function. So, like the idea of like having, kind of anger is they call it anger the protector. Anger is there to kind of protect against kind of infringements on our boundaries. It has a job as an emotion to keep us safe. And anxiety is the same thing, like kind of a feeling of fear. That's what, if you've ever kind of stepped out in front of a car by accident, and that feeling of and stepping back, that's what anxiety, that response is for, is to keep us alive. And it's when these kind of emotions get really heightened or activated outside the context of a stressor that makes sense to us, that it can feel really overwhelming, but our emotions generally are there to tell us something about the environment and to help us make sense of it. So it's really helpful when we have big feelings about this stuff to be curious about what that means. Okay. So it's tricky because it's actually really, really difficult to be curious when you're afraid, but it can really help if you can consciously orient yourself towards a feeling of curiosity when you're experiencing something uncomfortable. What does that mean? What's going on here? So I suppose to come back to kind of solidarity, as being kind of fundamentally to do with relationships, it's to do with relating, it's co-created, it's something that we do with others. So solidarity requires kind of a level of security in relating. So what I mean in that is that, like, we'll all have examples of relationships that feel kind of tenuous or a bit stressed, or like, you know, there's maybe somebody that you don't call when something's gone wrong, and there maybe is somebody that you would call when things go wrong. And a secure relating means that you feel kind of safe with the other person, that there's somebody that you kind of know how they're going to respond to things, and generally it's like in a way that's supportive, and vice versa. But these are the sorts of things that really help us in secure relating to each other as activists and just as human beings. So clarity, being consistent, like looking at practices of repair, because intimacy isn't never fighting. It's trying to figure out a way of fighting where, you know, you can reach a resolution that it's you and the other person versus the problem or the conflict rather than versus each other. So repair is all about trying to figure out how do we argue and then come back together afterwards and make sense of what happened, and, you know, be able to patch things up. Humility is really important, because none of us know everything, and we didn't always know what we know now, and we're not done learning at any point. So it's a bit about like knowing that there's no, yeah, none of us are at the end of our journey in terms of experiencing or learning about the world, and every day is a school day if you're paying attention. And then boundaries are really important. I talk about boundaries all the time, and I suppose I don't particularly love how boundaries get talked about in like social media discourse. I more mean boundaries are something that we hold for ourselves as a way of kind of interacting with other people. So it's helpful to think about your boundaries as being your responsibility. So if we're to think about activist circles, maybe, you know, I'd be somebody who would have a very strong tendency to say yes to lots of things, and that's my automatic default. Um, but a healthy boundary that a healthy boundary work, one of my supervisors who was very, very good and spotted that very in me very early on would have said to me, Rebecca, you know, one of the helpful things you can do around a boundary is just ask for more time before you commit to that thing that you don't have time to do. So a boundary might be, can I think about that and come back to you? And then making an informed decision, and making that's my boundary to hold, to kind of give me more space between that automatic impulse to say yes to something and then feeling overwhelmed by how much I have to do. So boundaries are ours to enforce, and people will challenge boundaries, but it's on us to hold them as well. And holding boundaries is really important in the activist space. So I suppose in terms of thinking about some of the themes, I suppose, and this again, like this is stuff that people would have spoken about, and it comes from research in terms of people's reflections on their experiences of activism space and what they felt went wrong. Solidarity breaks down around things like individualism. So people, I suppose, sometimes getting very caught up in their own experience of this and feeling like it's feeling really responsible for being a leader or being the person that everybody comes to, and getting kind of individualistic about this and not thinking about the wider context. And then guilt and shame leading to paralysis. So I mentioned earlier, guilt and shame are some of the most unpleasant human emotions, and sometimes a byproduct of that is that we freeze, that we get really, really stuck, because it can be really difficult to, as I said, to be curious or to try and move or to problem solve if you're paralyzed by shame, if you're paralyzed by guilt, if you feel like I'm a bad person and I can't do anything. It's really difficult to get yourself out the door to go meet people and think about this stuff. Another kind of concept from psychoanalysis, and yeah, it's interesting because like politically this happens all the time. We talk about splits, particularly on this particular side of the political spectrum, but splitting happens all the time where, you know, it happens in groups where, you know, you get smaller and smaller sections of people with more niche ideology the further down you go. But I'm going to be talking about psychoanalytic kind of splitting. So What I mean there is splitting is a psychological defense that happens when somebody can't hold a both and thought. So what that means is that like, you know, we kind of break things down to being all good or all bad. And you sometimes see that around like people talking about other people. It sometimes happens in, you know, in breakups or something where, you know, somebody had a really, you know, really good long relationship with somebody, something happened and suddenly the other person's all bad. That's a split. That's not the full truth of what happened. It's a split between, you know, the person's narration of it, where they could see that that person was a good person, things were going really well, and then something happened that was painful, and the other person became all bad. So this happens sometimes in circles where somebody makes a mistake or says the wrong thing, or oh, sorry, yeah, somebody makes a mistake or says the wrong thing, and we can kind of very get into binary thinking about, you know, the humanity of the other person. And there's a writer that I really like who talks about like, I think it's really important to think about just that people aren't disposable, that, you know, there should be a pathway back. Most of the time there should be a pathway back for people to learn and figure stuff out, and that becoming very I suppose dogmatic about you know, good activists, bad activists, or, you know, like correct or incorrect, that, you know, holding the humanity of another person is allowing space for growth as well, and that people, you know, we've all had bad opinions and things, or like opinions that we regret having or that we've developed or honed since, and that's part of being alive. And some of us, you know, it's just about like splitting is about kind of not being able to tolerate both, and that the two truths are hard to put together, that somebody is a good person but also hurt me, or is a good person but also said this problematic, or whatever it is, and not being able to put the two things together so we can get binary about their worth. Um, that's a bit of a sentence. Competition for moral purity. So I think there is something that comes through as well in activism circles, and it is, I think it's around not wanting to split into thinking that you're bad, or to be kind of crippled by guilt and shame. That sometimes you get people who are very, you know, committed to being the most morally pure people, and that can end up kind of policing things or becoming very like which is, it's a painful position for the person doing that role as well, because it means that tolerating their own mistakes must be really painful too. But that's something as well that affects group dynamics and makes it difficult to kind of reach each other or connect in those moments. And burnout is obviously a really big factor for all of us, because um I do think there is a piece as well around like what, like the level of exposure, like vicarious trauma. So when we're talking about an activist space, we're talking about witnessing something that we're not actually, you're in kind of two worlds watching like what's happening. And there's obviously burnout from the exposure to the level of trauma and violence and horrific stuff that we're witnessing. And I'm saying this witnessing is different to living and experiencing, but I'm saying that the violence of it is absolutely on a body level. It does something to our nervous system that's really, really difficult to process. Um, and another thing that can happen as well is that, like, again, unconsciously, we go to roles that are familiar, or we reenact things that are familiar to us all the time, a lot of the time without meaning to. So sometimes stuff gets played out in groups where somebody goes into the role of savior, or somebody gets like pretty controlling, or somebody gets very funny about who's allowed to be in the group and who isn't. And that all of that is kind of like reenacting dynamics that we've been exposed to, again, like in the air that we breathe. Like, so it's that people are unconsciously maybe recreating stuff that they've lived through in order to feel some level of mastery, and that that isn't always something that they're consciously choosing to do. And in fact, a lot of the time it isn't. It's just kind of happening, and they're not always fully self-aware enough to notice when that's happening. So that is all well and good, Rebecca, but how do we prevent this? Um, I would say that solidarity requires a lot of different psychological skills, and these are skills that we all have to different degrees. Like, so this isn't specific to, and you don't have to have studied psychology to have these skills. That most people will have, like, will have all of these things actually in place. But thinking about them as specific skill sets helps us to build them and to strengthen them. So things like emotion regulation. So emotion regulation is like your ability to interact compassionately with your emotional state and to not lose control, I suppose. And what I mean by lose control is act in a way that isn't congruent with where we want to be. Being reflexive means being able to kind of think about things as they're happening. So um, your reflective capacity is kind of going away and thinking about something after it's happened, but reflexivity is being able to be reflective and act on it in the moment. So to kind of figure stuff out as it's happening and be responsive as it's happening. Empathy is, well, people know what empathy is. I've spoken a little bit about boundary work, about holding our boundaries and having moral courage, like being able to stand up and say the thing, even though it's hard. So these are some of, I suppose, the ideas that I think are helpful and other people have thought are helpful from speaking to them. One of the really big things is to slow our internal pace. So I find a lot of the time in activist spaces, we're responding really urgently to really urgent requests. So, there's really significant external urgency. And I'm not saying that we slow down and stop moving. That's not what I'm saying at all. But sometimes what happens is that our internal pace speeds up and we end up kind of feeling quite anxious or quite reactive to things. And that interferes with our ability to problem solve or to be strategic with what's happening. So what I'd say there is that, it's in order to make decisions and in order to think, we kind of need a level of emotion regulation. So if you've ever seen somebody who has road rage and you ask them to solve a Sudoku puzzle, there's no way that they could do it because the part of their brain that's able to problem solve is absolutely offline when they flip the lid or when they've, and it's the same when you're like super anxious. It's really hard to problem solve. So finding a way of like coming back to base, slowing things down a little bit, and that's going to look different for different people. But we're not saying to not respond to the external demand. We're saying figure out a way in your body to take a few breaths, to slow it down and to let yourself come back to base so that you can think, so that it's not a big panicked reaction. Because also an activist, but you need to be thinking about how does that affect the wider group? What's that like for the other person when they come in and they're stressed and panicked, and then you stress and panicked, and then dynamically you're creating, you're keeping that going together. So having to think about that, like how do I slow myself down? How do I lower my heart rate a little bit before I make a decision, or before I kind of move to action or jump on this particular thing. We have to model things like secure attachment and secure relational dynamics in our groups. And that comes back to what we were saying earlier about kind of treating other people as complex, nuanced human beings who have as deep and as interesting and as multifaceted an inner world as we do. So it's like understanding that every human being that you meet is as complicated as you are, and being able to kind of be responsive to them in the moment. And like it's about being able to tolerate disagreement. It's about being able to share moments of levity, like being able to kind of relate to each other in a way that feels safe and predictable and consistent. That, you meet me at a demo, I'm always going to ask you how you are. Do you know what I mean? That you're not going to meet a different version that is, suddenly cruel to you or suddenly dismissive or suddenly doesn't want to, so modeling secure attachment is really important. And the other thing that I think is really helpful to think about, and it's something I suppose that came up with another activist I was speaking to who was talking about self-care. And I don't know how others, I have a little bit of a reaction to self-care because I think the way sometimes that's talked about in terms of like employee assistance programs, it's a lot of the time it's in relation to, self-care so that you can continue to be productive or that you continue to do your job, or there's something that self-care that feels very tied to capitalism for me in a way that I don't like. But in saying that, it's also just really important that we figure out a way of relating to looking after ourselves and others that feels authentic and that feels doable. So, Joe Geary, he's another one of the psychologists for Palestine. I think it was Joe was saying about the idea that we extend to ourselves the same level of care that we give a house plant, that the idea that you're getting a little bit of light, a little bit of food, that you're watering yourself, that those things are really, really important as a baseline. But in terms of flipping it from self-care, which can sound a bit, I've personally found it very difficult when people have spoken to me about self-care in the context of organising, when I'm trying to explain why I'm organising and what we're up against and what Palestinians are up against. When people talk about self-care, it's almost like, well, what are you talking about? There's no time. Like, what does that mean? Like, are you not hearing what's happening? Do you not understand the depth of this? So one of the helpful frames that I kind of came across was the idea of reframing our psychological well-being as strategy, that like that is strategic, it's really important, and it's part of like how we sustain the movement. So it's also thinking about it in relation to other, because I think when you're organizing, it doesn't sit well always to be kind of thinking about me, my Fane, and how I look after myself, you know? So thinking about this as being strategic and something that you can do with others is really helpful. Um, yeah, so I suppose one of the things I think compassion is the balm for shame. And what I mean by compassion is the practice of witnessing, understanding, and committing to alleviating pain for ourselves and others. So I think, you know, most people on this call will have had an experience where you felt bad and something has happened, or you've experienced something that's affected you in a way that's really difficult. And I would really hope that most people on the call will have had the experience of talking to someone who got it and who responded compassionately, and that was a salve for the pain. So it's it's really important to kind of think about compassion as a skill set, I think. Compassion is something that we can offer others. It's something we can offer ourselves. And actually, the more that we practice a little bit of compassion for ourselves in our messiness, in our complexity, in the times that we mess up, in the times that we get things wrong, the more that we can hone it as a skill to help other activists. And the easier actually is to extend to others. So the more we kind of use and build that muscle, to think of it like a muscle as well as a skill. A skill, or I think a muscle is helpful because you have it, it's there, but you kind of have to work it out and figure out how to get it to do the thing you need it to do. So some of the kind of reflective bits with that is to I find, you know, in clinical work a lot of the time, the scripts that we have for ourselves and the way that we speak to ourselves, we most of the time wouldn't speak to anybody else like that. So if you had you have a friend or a comrade struggling with what you're struggling with, what's something that you would say to them? Or if you're really stuck in a very negative script, it's really helpful to kind of explore like what function is that serving for me? Because a lot of the time, the way that we criticize ourselves, it's almost like we feel like if I shame myself enough, if I'm critical enough of myself, then maybe I won't make another mistake. But we generally find that isn't the case. You know, that criticism isn't a really good motivator for behavioral change anyway. But some of the questions you can ask yourself if you're really stuck on something or really beating yourself up about something is that statement kind? Is it helpful or is it useful? And then what is a fairer alternative? So when I say that, it might be, say somebody makes a mistake or does the wrong thing in a group, the wrong thing being quite subjective. It's not that we're asking someone to say to themselves, well, I'm great and I never make mistakes and sure, it doesn't matter. We're just asking for somebody to say something that's a fair alternative statement, which might be, I said the wrong thing. I don't usually say the wrong thing. You know, I apologize for it. There's nothing more I can do for that. You know, that's a fair alternative to, you know, I'm a bad person. I always make mistakes. So it's helpful to think of ourselves as well and others as containing multitudes, that none of us are all one way all of the time. And a practice, I suppose, when I'm talking to parents and children, when somebody, ourselves or others, when somebody is upset, it's really helpful to have somebody in the room who's modeling being bigger, stronger, kinder, and wiser. And the more that we kind of practice compassion for self and others, the easier it is to slip into that role when the chips are down and when you need a boost. So yeah, I think that's kind of like some of what I wanted to talk about. And then this is a quote I really like from Gramsci, because like we're facing into something that is really, really psychologically horrifying and really difficult. It's been 2 years of more than 2 years of unfathomable violence and cruelty. And I don't know anybody who hasn't felt that on a soul level. I'm lucky to be surrounded by people who do care about this stuff and are watching. But Gramsci would have talked about pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. So in terms of taking something away from today, it's about trying to be, I suppose, a little bit more compassionate to ourselves, to others, and to figure out how do we build stronger movements as a byproduct of that, right? Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of will. And what I mean there is like we're looking at the horror clearly. We're looking at it in the eye and we're still choosing solidarity and hope. And we do have a world to win, and all we have to win it is each other. And a better world is possible, but we do have to will it and to envisage it. So what I mean there is like, you know, hope hope is also a verb. It can be something that we do, and it's not easy to have hope, but it can be a practice. And when I think about that, like one of my friends, a man who would have done one of the previous sessions here, the man talks about when Palestine is free. And every time she says it, it it fills my heart a little bit, because it's that deep knowing and that commitment to envisaging that we're going to will it into existence by believing that it can be happy, that it can happen, and that hope is part of what sustains us as well. So yeah, there is a way, but we really do have to commit to minding ourselves, minding each other, and looking at solidarity and hope as part of the practice, as thinking about how do we help that boy us. I think that's me. Thanks.
Great. Wow. Wow, Rebecca, that was an amazing presentation. I have so many reflections and thoughts, and like we've been probably a lot of people on this call have been doing activism for a long time, and probably there's an awful lot of things that you've brought up that maybe we never think about. We're just on to the next action. We're very activist focused and stuff like that. So the reflective practice that you've discussed there, and the aspects of caring for each other and stuff like that, I think is critical. I know from talking with different groups that especially when something happens like a so-called ceasefire, or there's a change of obviously we all know it's not really a ceasefire, because almost 400 people have been Palestinians have been killed since, that groups wonder how they're going to cope or revector or pivot or whatever. So anyway, amazing food for thought. We have some questions, and we have lots of thank yous. Rebecca, thank you for presenting this evening, the Irish Psychologist for Palestine, of which you are very involved, and I think a founding member. Is that true? Yeah, are doing amazing work, and are very proud of you. So let's see. There's a shout out for a conference that's happening this weekend. I mean, obviously, this weekend is also the National March for coinciding with International Day of Solidarity with Palestine, and that's on Saturday in Dublin, 1:00, starting from the Garden of Remembrance, going to the Dáil. But there's also a conference on in St. James's Hospital. And there's a link which we can provide. Would you like to just say, I presume you're aware of that conference, Rebecca? Could you just say something about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to echo Mac, it's going to be a really good conference. It's on the 29th of this month, so it's Saturday, if people can pop along and support it. There's lots of different speakers. I know my comrade and friend Tala Lally is going to be speaking, as well as lots of other distinguished members. So it's going to be really, really good. People can pop along and support. That'd be great.
Okay. As I say, we'll put up the link. It's on Eventbrite. I think you have to register for it, I think. Matthew, was there any questions there that jumped out at you? That you want to just maybe ask?
A couple of people were asking who's the author who writes about splitting, or the author you mentioned who writes about splitting.
Absolutely. So what I was saying was that comes from like the school of psychoanalysis. So lots of people have written about it. But it's definitely something you could read about through Freud or through Klein. There's loads of different writers who've written about it, but essentially it's just, if you boil it down to its bones, it's a psychological defense where we split things into good or bad in order to not be holding two completely contrasting pieces. Yeah.
Sorry. Let's see. Did I post that link properly there? Sorry.
Oh, no, so Leon Starr has a piece there around people aren't disposable. So there's an author that I really like called Clementine Morgan. And they have a podcast called Fucking Cancelled that I really like. But that's just a personal preference. They are an author. And I suppose they think a lot about psychoanalysis and think about kind of movement building and how we treat other activists. So they had been cancelled, and it was kind of just a piece around kind of like how they made sense of that afterwards. And yeah, so people aren't disposable. And I really, really fundamentally agree with that as a principle. And I think as activists, we need to have foundational principles that we don't let go of, that in every context that we hold on to certain principles, and that's about being disciplined. And that's also what sustains us in the work.
Yeah. There's a statement and a question there from Miriam. Great presentation, Rebecca. Thank you. I can be upset by many in my circles who say I don't follow or watch anything in the news or coverage. I can't bear to know. Yet many are not even interested in BDS or thinking about how they spend their money. Any strategies welcome? Big question.
Tricky one, isn't it? It is. And I suppose my answer to that is that, like, a lot of the time I don't go into any interaction expecting to change the other person, and that expectation helps a lot with disappointment. So what we can do is we can welcome people in and we can offer information. But if we're going in with the expectation that someone's going to change their mind in the moment based on anything that we do or we don't say, they're going to disappoint us. And I know for myself, and probably for yourself, Miriam, a lot of the time when we do change our minds about important bits, it's not in the moment, maybe when somebody is giving you the information, it's later when you've had a chance to process it. So I'm not saying don't be frustrated with them, absolutely, or don't be upset about this, because it's obviously upsetting when you're sharing something that's so important and so like devastating. It's hard to imagine how somebody couldn't feel the way that we feel about it. But it's also like, in terms of humanizing them, to think that they're not able to stand in their power for whatever reason, they're not able to hold that, and that isn't a failing on your part to not be able to let them see. But I would say just to hold the door open, that people do come round and people do see, and lots of people who I would never have seen at a demo 5 or 6 years, they're out marching now, and that still matters. I think it does still matter. It doesn't mean you can't be disappointed or frustrated or angry with them. But in terms of strategy, I think it's to not use, because I think sometimes we do go to, I'm definitely guilty of this, like particularly with family members, I'd be like, how could you do it? And we go to shaming, we go to blaming, we go to the sorts of things that actually shut people down. Whereas, I suppose for me, what I find helpful is go, oh yeah, that's fair enough that that's your opinion. Have you heard about this though? And try and model curiosity around it so that they don't shut down. And that a lot of the time people do respond a bit more favorably to that.
Okay. There's a question there from Anya. Many thanks, Rebecca. The description of solidarity as a relational practice is so vital in maintaining well-being on this long road to activism. I have found the network of various groups in Ireland as invaluable in nourishing our direction and affirmative of the compassion and activism I have witnessed. A humbling, ongoing experience, which is absolutely underpinned by hope as a verb, which we hold and act upon. I think that's certainly one of the could you elaborate maybe a bit on that? Obviously, it struck a chord from your presentation.
I stole it from a Massive Attack song. I don't know if people are familiar with Teardrop, but love is a verb, love is a doing word. It was something, I suppose, when we were talking early on in the latest onslaught about like how do we keep going and like what does motivate us, what gets us out of bed in the morning, and it has to be a vision that something else is possible, that it's really hard getting up thinking that you can't change things or that things will always be this way. So hope as a revolutionary practice is holding the vision of it, and when people are like I comfort myself imagining myself, visiting a free Palestine, that's or envisaging that for my friends being able to go home to their home place, to their farms, to do the olive harvest, that all of these pieces, holding them in mind and critically thinking about what could that look like. It's part of willing it into existence. I think that's important.
Yeah, there's one there from Leon. Thank you so much. This has been very insightful. When you were talking about splitting, you said something along the lines that people aren't disposable. Did you say this was from a book, or where would you recommend more information about this?
I jumped ahead of you and answered that already, Tom, where I was saying read a bit of
Oh,
Freud or a bit
sorry.
of Klein if you're so inclined. But also just like get the spark notes, like just like that these are different types of psychological defenses and like looking at psychoanalytic reads on how we protect ourselves. It's really interesting. And you don't have to read like massive tech. Most people don't. I just was super into it as a young woman. But yeah, that's lovely on you. Thanks.
Okay. Um, really interesting to think about ourselves as flawed human beings who make mistakes. Good not to take the moral high ground around activism. Any comment on that?
Yeah, because it alienates people. Like most people believe that they're good people. And when we take a position where they're bad and we're good, it shuts down connection, shuts down communication, and it actually reduces the likelihood that we're going to be able to influence each other or affect each other or do any of the nice stuff that humans do around building things.
Okay. I've shared the link there on the for the conference in the chat. So if you'll see the chat button on the bottom of your screen there, the link is in there. Let's see. Matthew, is there any other question there that you'd like to pick up on?
One here, how do we support people who've been arrested doing direct actions from a psych says physiologically, but I assume they mean psychologically standpoint, or something that could be good for them to keep in mind themselves?
Mm. It's a big one, isn't it? Because I suppose like no two people who have been arrested have the same kind of history or that like people are going to have different needs. I think one of the best ways to figure out what people need is to ask them. So what sort of support, what might look like support for me might look different to Matthew, might look different to Tom. So like having direct conversations with people about what they find helpful. But definitely solidarity is is a balm for when you do take a risk and where you have done something that's morally courageous for a cause. It's really important that you feel the support of the community behind you, that you know that people are standing with you, whether they're physically there or they're writing you letters or they're sending you messages, that like that you feel that lived sense of support. But again, like the level of support and the type of support is going to vary. I don't like getting unsolicited phone calls where someone else might find that really helpful, you know, but it's about thinking with the person about what might be useful for them, you know. And not everybody who gets arrested is traumatized by it. And some people really are. Absolutely. It depends on their experience and how that went for them. So, but it's to not make assumptions and to ask.
Yeah. Anya Hutchinson shared some lovely, inspiring words there. And now maybe they're ones you've referred to already. Can you see those, Rebecca? Love, love
Yeah,
is a
that's the
verb.
lyrics of the song I referenced.
Okay, I
Yeah, that's the
presumed
massive
it
attack
was.
song, Teardrop.
Okay, so I've shared those in the chat, so people can see those if you press the chat button there on the bottom of your screen. And Mary Harganen says, "I find the poetry from Gaza poets a great inspiration. In fact, my full inspiration." So thank you for that, Mary. Is that a particular work, or is it from a is it a particular book, or is it various poets? I presume. I'm not sure. Okay. Um, really brilliant, Rebecca, and so timely given where we are at right now. Thank you so much. But lots of food for consideration. Okay, lots and lots of thank yous. So thank you, Rebecca. Very interesting and insightful session. Any perspective on how to cope when a fellow activist becomes emotional and aggressive towards pastors who don't appear to sympathize with the cause?
The tricky one, isn't it? Because like it's really hard to witness and be part of that. I suppose one of the quickest ways to help somebody emotionally regulate is to acknowledge the emotion, like to help them name what the emotion is. So there's a principle in, you know, kind of child work that we talk about naming it to tame it. So, you know, sometimes even saying like, I can see that you're really, really angry about this, or I can see that really, really hurt you, or, you know, and if you can make a good guess with somebody, but like that will also relationally depend on how close you are. So sometimes, you know, it can be helpful to give the feedback that actually I need to take a breath first before I interact with this person, so that you're not like getting caught in the crossfire either. But the feedback that I suppose I think it is helpful. Like that was somebody that I love and respect said to me that people very rarely change their minds in the moment. So even given that feedback to that, not while they're heightened, but when they've come down a little bit, to have a think about that, that just because they didn't agree with you in the moment doesn't mean they won't go home and think about that, and just kind of creating that space for, yeah, that's how it is now, but it mightn't be forever. Can sometimes help instill a bit of hope, or instill a little bit of hope. But also, you're not responsible for emotionally managing other activists. That there's another part there as well about if they're behaving in a way that kind of is, is not necessarily helping them or the cause or stressing you out. It's also okay to give a little bit of feedback on that. That I found that stressful, and I'm wondering what you think about it now. But don't try and do the repair conversation while they're still super heightened. Like wait until you're going for a cup of coffee afterwards or another day, and just empathically kind of try and name it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. A question there from. Sorry, did I interrupt you there? There's a question there from Oshin. How have you found the response among colleagues involved in psychiatry, psychology, counselling, etc., to the genocide? Is there momentum behind BDS movements or similar in professional organisations, unions within psychology in Ireland broadly?
Oshin, I'm delighted you asked me about this because generally speaking, I would describe myself as a cynical psychologist. I can be quite derogatory towards other psychologists. It's a bit of a problem, even though I respect and admire and have worked with many. But sometimes psychology is it can be part of social problems sometimes in terms of deciding what's normal or not normal and so on and so forth. But the Psychological Society of Ireland recently actually carried a motion to become an apartheid-free zone, which would be in full compliance with the BDS strategy and principles. And I'm really happy that the PSI did that. That was really, really cool, and it was really good. And I think other disciplines can follow suit because there's a precedent. And there's lots of work happening in terms of other organizations like the Ireland-Palestine Mental Health Network. Ani's like one of the main persons there that they do incredible work. There's a really good network of people who work in mental health who are working on this stuff, and lots of psychiatrists that I've worked with through healthcare workers and other different organizations as well are working really, really hard. And in terms of the unions, there's actually I suppose a day of action on the 28th that's been called by the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, where people are calling for kind of a stand up for Palestine peace around lunchtime. So if you have a look on our website, there's also information on that. But just to say the unions are behind us. But I sometimes get frustrated with people expressing huge frustration with unions. Like the best way to shape a union is to join it. So the bit about let's get in and kind of work with them. And now I'm absolutely a member, but I haven't, I'm critical of myself for that as well. But there's a point there around join the unions, figure out what they're doing, and put your, for all of us to put our shoulders to the wheel that way as well, because we're stronger in a union. Oh, nice to see you, Rachel from Leitrim. I'm actually also from Leitrim, Rachel. Sorry, just seen that in the chat, but I hope that answers your question.
Okay, Rebecca, what about burnout? Either individually, like you discussed it earlier on. Is that something you'd like to just say a few more words about?
Sure. So I think it's really helpful to kind of notice when that's happening in our body. So burnout can feel very physiological. We might notice our appetite or sleep or weight. Lots of things are affected by burnout. Our interest in things, being able to motivate ourselves to do specific stuff, but burnout, again, meet your basic needs like a pot plant to start with, and then try and figure out how do I navigate what needs to be done in the short term, immediate term, and long term, and then think about what pacing is and what does it look like if you have a certain amount of energy, a certain amount of resources, getting people to, and also delegation, because sometimes I would have definitely found when I was burnt out, I find it harder to think about delegation. But that's actually really important work. What stuff can be allocated to somebody else? Where can I ease up? What sort of stuff can I give back? And practicing saying I need a bit of space to take a breath. And I think within the movement as well, there was a really nice, I can't remember who said it, but to think about it like a choir, that there's a piece where the choir, the sound will carry, the song will carry. if you take the breath, that people need to take the breath in order to keep the song going. You have to trust the people around you that they'll be able to keep the choir going as well. That it was much more eloquently phrased than that, but it's the idea of thinking of minding burnout and not waiting until you're really, really not able to function in order to manage it, but noticing the tells in yourself, reflecting on it when you've come out of it. What were the first kind of couple of weeks like, and what could you have done at that point when you had more resources to navigate it, you know? But bringing people in and telling people as well helps, because people do tend to respond compassionately, because most of us have been burnt out to some degree in different ways, you know? Okay.
That message really comes across very powerfully, Rebecca, tonight, like that you need to kind of mind yourself, and you need to be in touch with your feelings. And the feelings are facts, feelings are information, as you said. And that those feelings, sometimes we all have these feelings. Look, are we making any difference? Is it worth going to the next march? Like, can I commit? Can I commit? But just balancing your time in terms of also being able to say no, or realize that you need to say no sometimes, just to keep strategically kind of making sure that you're in the best kind of mindset, and using your resources to best use. I think in terms of, like, as you say, this is a long struggle. This is not something which is going to be, over anytime soon, unfortunately. There's a couple of questions there which I think even I can answer, and they're to do with recordings of these sessions. So yes, the recordings of the sessions will be up on YouTube. We had hoped to have them up a little bit earlier, but I did get a message during this webinar saying the first one is actually up now. So the one on the central bank is up there now on the YouTube, on the IPSC YouTube channel. If you go to the IPSC website, click on the YouTube link, you will see the first one up there now. And the rest of the live ones, or the ones that have happened, will be up there within the next week. And so this one should be up there by the end of this week, hopefully. So that's on those. Let's see, have I missed any there? Yeah, there's quite a few more have come in there while I'm speaking.
More just came in, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Matthew, over to you again. If you spot one there. Okay. Obviously, yeah.
Thank you. And
sorry, Matthew.
As one just came in, we do a weekly vigil here locally. It feels like a great support for us all involved, and reminding those passing by and cars beeping, though not sure the value beyond our locality. Don't know if you want to.
Okay, you also have to think as well, I suppose, just to say to you and to reassure you that it's your locality for that specific one, but they happen all over the country, and that's the power of it, is that it's so visible and it's not going away. And that's why things like the local vigils, like the big national demonstrations, when we're able to mobilise like 60,000 people, 100,000 people, and put them on the streets in Dublin and bring the whole place to a standstill, it serves the function of telling the government that we're not backing down, we're not giving up. They are going to move, and they have moved. They haven't given us what we've wanted yet, but we have to keep that pressure on, and the pressure is the visibility. It's showing that this, like, Palestinian solidarity in Ireland is not a fringe position, it's an absolute majority position. So it's about holding that line. And I do get sometimes frustrated when people are like, what's the point of the marches? The marches are really important. They're really important to show the sheer volume of people that are absolutely in support of implementing the OTB, of there being some sort of sanctions, of there being a consequence for what's happening, and that we're frustrated and angry with our government for not actioning that. So I think, at the local level, in terms of stuff that we're doing, and increasing as well, like the stalls, like the piece about increasing awareness and inviting people into what they can do and what they can be part of it. It's a defense against the hopelessness of it as well, and like getting people involved. Every piece like that is I think it's all important together, because like it's diversity of tactics as well, that some people are going to do particular types of actions. It's really important that we do all of them so that we keep the pressure up. That's all.
Yeah, just a very practical question there. Someone wanted to try and copy and paste the verse from the song. What is that song, Rebecca?
Oh, it's Teardrop by Massive Attack. I don't know. I don't know the entire, like, if there's anything in there
Yeah,
that's risky.
yeah,
I have no idea,
yeah.
but I just
So
like
if
that
if
first.
you Google Teardrops from Massive Attack, then you will and lyrics, you can get them on YouTube, right? Um,
Mhm.
question there from Mary. Thank you, Rebecca, Tom, Matthew. Appreciate all that you do. It is motivating, to say the least. I'm in the throes of exposing myself to the horrors unfolding in Palestine and trying to figure out what actions I should take in an effort to raise more awareness. I feel overwhelmed at times, but think to the future when my daughter will turn to me and ask, "What did you do?" My daughter is only 2.5. So when I see the children, baby suffering, it just breaks my heart. So uh, thank you. That's a very personal comment, and certainly is gives a different perspective on that. Yeah. Um, okay, I think there's one there for. I think it's you could be busy, Rebecca. Thank you so much. Do you often do these type of talks? Are you available to go on a countrywide tour? Uh, I think it would be very useful for many activist groups. I'm reading an extra line into that there, so I'll leave it with you.
Yeah, my hope is that this will be on YouTube so people wouldn't have to listen to me more than once. So, like, if people would like to kind of listen to it, this would be available through the Solidarity series. I don't personally, because I also, as well as the Dublin branch stuff, I work full time as a psychologist. So, kind of getting out and about and talking to different groups, like if I can offer the recording and if that's useful to people. And again, like as I said, I'm not an expert. This is just some stuff I think there's lots of different resources out there and others who would also be able to speak to it, but speaking to other activists and people who've been involved for a long time is really helpful as a way to learn from what's happened previously.
Yeah, and just to remind people,
Okay.
this will be up on the YouTube channel pretty shortly. So uh, there's another question there from Anya. There is a useful reading in the book called Embodied Activism by Ray Johnson, which explores maintaining well-being as compassionate activists. So that's thank you for that. Maybe we'll copy that and put it in the chat, maybe. We've got news today that the triple lock proposal at Galway City Council failed by one vote today. This is not what the Irish people voted for, Lisbon. How can we mobilise after with the loss of, also referring to the loss of Margaretta Darcy, who was a long-time activist both in Galway, Shannon, anti-war, lived in Galway for 15 years. So Margaretta is a bit of a legend down there, and passed away. So our thoughts and are with her family, and yeah. So there's one there from Catherine. Let's see. That work in the Department of Social Welfare. The department has a well-being department and runs webinars for the infinite number of specific subjects, for bereavement to menopause to men's health. I requested a specific one on trauma relating to genocide to obviously help with the mental anguish, but also strategically to name it for all those that believe that's the Middle East, nothing to do with us. Reply I received was like, you would say to a child in a different setting, reduce your screen time. I would appreciate suggestions for response. So obviously a very poor response from the department. Any comment on that one, Rebecca?
Solidarity, Catherine, it's really tough, particularly with these kind of structural institutional pieces, because things like the department, they're all quite afraid of doing or saying the wrong thing, or they've it's really difficult to affect change in there. Like, I'm wondering about, yeah, it's if I knew how to help you, I would there, but I'm not sure how to navigate that because you're talking about a really big kind of structural power bit. So what I'd be saying is going back and leaning into kind of what can you do at the group level. So the bit about maybe even getting a few people at work, would they do like something that is organized around kind of Palestine, that those sorts of bits, and then so that you're not acting by yourself or through the unions, like these sort of bits are important so that you're not kind of facing into the structural power in by yourself, because that does crush us into the ground. So anything that you can do around capacity building with other workers or people who are also in the department before kind of going to demand change will help you. So kind of union stuff, worker level stuff, finding other people who are also feeling similarly and thinking about what would what would be kind of an easy win for you as well. So to start off with a smaller ask and then incrementally increase it, because they're going to say no to, they do tend to say no. It doesn't mean we shouldn't ask, but in terms of like keeping hope, it's about trying to kind of, can we do small wins? So yeah, there's different things we can do that way. And I'm sorry that I don't have a straightforward answer for you, but yeah, good luck with that. Fair play.
Okay. One there from Dermot. I think there is an observable fall off in participation at the moment. The Friday Bridgel was dropped in from Condra after the ceasefire. But when some members brought it back a couple of weeks ago, the public responded with enthusiasm, with endless waves and beeps. Our return was appreciated by the public. The public haven't stopped caring, even if activists feel unsecure about carrying on. Interesting point there, Dermot, and I think that is, that kind of questioning is going on in different groups. I think sometimes that I'm involved in a group myself on the Fairview walk bridge or walkover bridge, pedestrian bridge, and on Friday evenings as well. And we've kept it going, and I think it is from an activist point of view, I think it's important, even though it's difficult sometimes to do it on a regular basis. I think it is kind of keeps the flag flying in, as we say, keeps it in the when it's, especially when RTE and the various news channels are quite happy to let it just slide off the off the horizon, that we keep the flag flying, we keep it there. And obviously, we have our national march coming up on Saturday. We have our Palestinian, well, I know that's a national event, so hopefully people will turn out in great numbers. I mean, some people would like to see those numbers dropping, but it's very important that we, do keep the effort, and I think it's very important that we've kept that going all through the last 2 years, and hopefully, so it is tough, but I think that regular protest and stuff like that, especially when events like, as you say, that so-called ceasefire happens, that we're there to counter that narrative. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm kind of conscious of time. We've gone, unless there's any other questions there, I think we could go on quite a while, but I think, to be fair to Rebecca, I think she's certainly given us so much to think about tonight. Rebecca, are there any kind of final words that you would like to kind of say before we call it?
Our Scott Kayla Mar Nadini, so but we live in each other's shadows and we mind each other and we take care of the movement, and that's how we keep the movement going. So that's the closer for me. Just look after each other, create space for mistakes, for your own mistakes, for other people's mistakes, and think about what serves the movement rather than, the rest of it. Yeah. Thanks everybody. That was a nice space and a nice Q&A. So thanks for being kind. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. So again, thank you, Rebecca. That's been amazing. So much food for thought. I think it's something that goes through, we think about every day, every week, every group meeting, every time we're trying to carry on some, thinking about what are the next steps. And it's as you say, it's a cycle. In terms of how we cope with this. So just to say, we have one more session next week, which is the final session, and it is based around activism priorities for the IPSC at the moment for the Palestinian struggle. So we'll have Zoe Lawler and Brian Hegartig on next Monday night, same time, same link. And if anyone is in Dublin on Thursday night, we have the Palestinian Culture Night on Thursday the 27th in the Teachers Club, but you do have to book for that. It's €15 entry fee. And of course, the National March on Saturday, 1 o'clock. We hope to see as many people out as possible. So all remains for me is to say thank you to Rebecca, to Matthew, and to all of you who've joined us tonight. We've really, I've certainly learned an awful lot, and I look forward to learning more and reflecting more, and keeping the struggle up. And as Rebecca said, it's all about hope. It's all about a better world is possible. Palestine will be free. And I think that's a very positive message. And I think we all support that. So thank you again.